This show is part of One Place, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to today's roundup. We have a heavy docket today, ranging from decades-old tragedies to modern-day digital defamation. Here is what we are tracking. Susan Smith's ex-husband is making a chilling plea to keep her behind bars 30 years after the murder of their sons. A self-proclaimed psychic on TikTok has been ordered to pay $10 million for falsely accusing a professor of the Idaho student murders. A disgruntled Colorado man will spend 42 years in prison for killing the wife of a former coworker. A longtime Justice Department staffer is facing federal charges in a disturbing child pornography case. An Indiana woman is accused of manslaughter following a fatal bonfire fight sparked by a comment about child custody. A Kentucky teenager has been charged with DUI after an ATV crash that took the life of her best friend. The Austin District Attorney has cleared the officers who killed a mass shooter despite significant political pressure. An Oregon man is being held without bail after allegedly terrorizing his neighbors with a variety of weapons. A recently pardoned January 6th rioter has been arrested again for allegedly assaulting a woman on a D.C. area train. And finally, the state of Minnesota is suing the Trump administration over what it calls unlawful and retributive cuts to Medicaid funding.
We start today with a case that shocked the nation 3 decades ago and is now back in the headlines as the possibility of parole looms.
That's right. It's been 30 years since Susan Smith confessed to drowning her 2 young sons, Michael and Alex, in a South Carolina lake. In 1994, she originally claimed a carjacker had taken them, leading to a massive 9-day manhunt. When she finally admitted to pushing her car into John D. Long Lake with the boys strapped inside, the world was horrified. Now, her ex-husband David Smith is speaking out as she becomes eligible for parole every 2 years.
David Smith has been very clear about his stance. He told Dateline that while he once wanted an eye for an eye, he is now focused on ensuring she never leaves prison. He wears a pin with his son's photos to every hearing. Susan, for her part, has maintained a pen-pal relationship with a producer for 20 years, claiming she isn't a horrible person, but someone who made a horrible decision. She says she intended to die with them but jumped out at the last second. However, the jury at the time saw it as premeditated, sparked by a letter from a boyfriend who didn't want children.
The parole board recently denied her release, but David knows he'll have to return in 22-6 to fight it again. He says it's his way of standing up for Michael and Alex, who never got a chance to grow up. It's a haunting reminder of the long-term trauma these cases leave behind, even 30 years later.
Moving from a decades-old crime to the modern world of social media, a federal jury has sent a massive message about the consequences of online accusations.
This involves Ashley Guillard, a TikToker who uses tarot cards to solve crimes. She repeatedly posted videos claiming that University of Idaho professor Rebecca Schofield orchestrated the 2022 murders of 4 students. She even went as far as to suggest the professor had an inappropriate relationship with one of the victims. The problem? Professor Schofield wasn't even in town when the murders happened, and she had never met the victims.
The jury awarded Schofield $10 million in damages, $6.5 million for the murder claims, and $3.5 million for the false relationship claims. Guillard has been defiant, calling the jury lazy and ignorant, and she plans to appeal. But the legal precedent here is significant. It shows that spiritual or psychic claims don't protect you from defamation laws. Professor Schofield said the verdict sends a message that false statements online have real-world consequences for real people.
It's a huge win for the professor, who had to endure millions of views on videos painting her as a murderer. Now that Brian Koberger has been charged and pleaded guilty to those crimes, this verdict helps clear the air for the Moscow community to focus back on the actual victims.
Next up, we look at a tragic case in Colorado where a workplace dispute turned into a deadly home invasion.
Ernest Cunningham, who is 53, was just sentenced to 42 years in prison. The backstory is chilling. Cunningham had been fired from his job and blamed a former coworker. In June of 2024, he went to that coworker's apartment in Denver to confront him. But when he knocked, it was the coworker's 23-year-old wife, Kelsey Roberts-Gariety, who opened the door. Cunningham shot and killed her right there.
The husband told police that Cunningham had been doing drugs on the job and had been threatening him since the firing. What makes this even more tragic is that Cunningham was already out on parole for a burglary conviction at the time. Kelsey's sister, Kylie Al-Nubuat, said that while 42 years is basically a life sentence for a man his age, The family is serving their own life sentence of grief. It's a terrifying example of how workplace grievances can escalate into senseless violence against innocent family members.
Now let's shift to a disturbing development within the federal government itself, involving a staffer at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Timothy Parsons, a legal staffer in D.C., has been arrested on child pornography charges. This case actually grew out of an investigation into a former child psychotherapist, Victor Blythe. Investigators found messages sent to Parsons that contained child sex abuse material. When the FBI searched Parsons' home in Bethesda, he allegedly admitted to receiving the messages back in 2019 and even sending sexually charged responses to the images.
The Justice Department has placed him on leave, emphasizing that they hold employees to the highest ethical standards. It's always particularly jarring when someone working within the very system meant to prosecute these crimes is found to be participating in them. Parsons is scheduled for a court appearance this Friday, and while no material was found in an initial preview of his current devices, a full forensic exam is still pending.
In Indiana, a casual gathering around a bonfire turned fatal after a heated argument over a very personal subject.
Samantha Mayhew is facing involuntary manslaughter charges after the death of Kirsten Moore. Witnesses say the two women were at a bonfire when Mayhew started questioning Moore about why she didn't have custody of her child. That sparked a physical fight. Mayhew reportedly grabbed Moore's hoodie, and they both fell toward a rock pile. There are also allegations that Mayhew put Moore in a chokehold.
When deputies found Mayhew walking down the road later, she was covered in blood and reportedly had an abusive attitude, telling officers that the started it. It's a tragic situation where alcohol and a sensitive topic led to a permanent loss of life. The sheriff's office is waiting on autopsy results to confirm the exact cause of death, but Mayhew is currently being held on a $30,000 bond.
Turning now to Kentucky, where a small community is mourning the loss of a 16-year-old girl in an ATV accident.
This is a heartbreaking story out of Vico. A 16-year-old girl was driving an ATV with 3 passengers when it went over an embankment. Her best friend, Emmeline Clark, was killed in the crash. The driver, whose name hasn't been released because she's a minor, is now charged with DUI. Sheriff Joe Engel said the entire school and community are hurting because these girls were so close.
But the investigation doesn't stop with the driver. Police are looking into how these teens got alcohol in the first place. They've executed search warrants on the phone of the ATV's owner, Noah Back, and are reviewing surveillance footage from local businesses. The sheriff hinted that more charges, possibly even vehicular homicide, could be presented to a grand jury. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of underage drinking and the devastating ripple effects one night of poor decisions can have.
In Austin, Texas, a controversial policy regarding police shootings has put the district attorney in the crosshairs of state leaders.
Travis County DA Jose Garza has a policy of sending every single officer involved shooting to a grand jury. However, in the case of the 3 officers who killed Ndiaga Diagne, he's making an exception. Diagne had opened fire on a crowd at a bar with an AR-style rifle, killing 3 people. The officers arrived within minutes and took him down. Garza called the officers heroes and said their actions undoubtedly saved lives, officially closing the review without charges.
The decision comes after a week of intense political backlash. Governor Greg Abbott and Senator Ted Cruz both criticized the DA, with Abbott even suggesting he would personally intervene if the officers were prosecuted. While the DA's office says the decision was based on the indisputable facts of the mass casualty situation, the Austin Police Association says the relationship between law enforcement and the DA remains dysfunctional and distrusting. It highlights the intense scrutiny and political weight that now follows every police shooting, even those clearly deemed heroic.
Now let's look at a bizarre and frightening series of events in Oregon, where a man is accused of terrorizing his neighborhood with everything from a stun baton to a bow and arrow.
Dustin Ropebard is being held without bail after months of erratic behavior. In one instance, he allegedly aimed a bow and arrow at homes and people. In another, he reportedly chased a bystander with a knife and a stun baton, only for the confrontation to end with the 2 men high-fiving. Police say his behavior was driven by a mix of psychedelic mushrooms and the stress of his wife filing for divorce. Neighbors eventually wrote a collective letter to authorities saying they were terrified to let their children outside because Rothbard had been seen discharging dozens of rounds from a firearm in his house.
Despite a judge previously prohibiting him from possessing weapons, police found an AR-15 and a revolver in his possession. He's now facing multiple felony counts, including burglary and unlawful use of a weapon. It's a case that really highlights the gaps in public safety, when someone is clearly spiraling but remains in the community until a major incident occurs.
In Washington, D.C., a man who was recently pardoned by President Trump for his role in the January 6th Capitol riot finds himself back in handcuffs.
Brian Bettencourt was pardoned on January 20th, but just weeks later he was arrested for allegedly assaulting a woman on a metro train. The assault, in this case, involved him touching a woman's hair without her consent, an act he reportedly live-streamed himself. Activists who have followed Bettencourt for years say he has a long history of terrorizing women and girls, stretching back over a decade.
Bettencourt is a self-professed white supremacist who was on probation during the original Capitol riot. He had told his probation officer he was going to D.C. to distribute Bibles, but instead joined the insurrection. This new arrest in Arlington, Virginia, for assault and battery brings his conduct back into the spotlight, just as the debate over the January 6th pardons continues to simmer. It seems his return to freedom was very short-lived.
Finally, we turn to a major legal battle between the state of Minnesota and the federal government over the future of Medicaid funding.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, specifically targeting CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz. The administration has deferred over $250 million in Medicaid payments to the state, claiming non-compliance and potential fraud. But Minnesota argues this is actually political punishment, following a Truth Social post where the president promised a day of reckoning and retribution for the state.
The lawsuit claims that the federal government is being intentionally vague about which claims are actually fraudulent, preventing the state from even attempting to fix the issues. They argue this violates the Administrative Procedure Act because the cuts are arbitrary and capricious. If these cuts continue, Minnesota officials say it will be crippling to the state budget and will hurt the most vulnerable citizens who rely on those services. It's a high-stakes game of constitutional chicken between state and federal power.
That covers our main stories for today. It's clear that whether it's a 30-year-old murder case or a modern funding dispute, the wheels of justice are always turning, often in very public and political ways.
Thank you for joining us for this daily briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with more updates on the stories that matter most. Make sure to follow us so you never miss an episode. Until then, have a safe and informed day.